Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Capital Modernization Consultation Launch, or the information session for BC credit unions. My name is Christina Panaggio, and I'm one of the stakeholder engagement specialists here at BCFSA, and I'll get us started and situated with some pointers about the format of this Zoom webinar session. Today's webinar is scheduled for an hour and a half, but depending on the questions we might have, we may finish early. Your microphones have been muted and you're in listen-only mode. Similarly, you will not be on camera and off video. At the bottom of your screen, you will see two icons, the chat function. You're welcome to use the chat function and send us the panelists messages if you'd like. We'll also use that function to pop in general information. There is also a Q&A function, and this is where you can submit your questions that we'll follow up with at the end of the webinar. As you are in listen-only mode, your questions will need to be typed into the Q&A, and then we'll ask the questions at the end. Finally, we'll be recording today's session, and it will be available on our website in a few days. Next slide. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations peoples who have been stewards of this land, which we all call home, for many generations. While we meet here today on a virtual platform, many of us are in different locations throughout the province, and I would like to encourage you to take a moment to reflect and acknowledge the traditional territory you may be calling from. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. Our first speaker today is Chris Algard, Senior Vice President of Supervision. We have Derek Lau, Vice President of Supervision, and Rebecca Lowry, our Director of Reporting and Standards. And now I'll pass on to Rebecca, who will go through our agenda.
Thank you, Christina. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the session today. Now, for this particular session, we wanted to take an opportunity to go through the consultation process, a little bit on the paper itself that was published last week, and talk about next steps. This is an opportunity to walk through the different opportunities to engage and ask questions. We'll be holding a number of information sessions, as well as talk about where you can find the consultation paper, what's included in that paper, and how you can provide feedback to us on the paper itself. So if we can move on to the next slide, and I'll pass it over to Chris.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rebecca, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to take just a very few minutes to introduce some of the key elements of the process that we've undertaken so far in the capital modernization project up until this point. And we have been working on this for the better part of a year. Rebecca and Derek both are going to give you a little more details, as Rebecca just outlined. But I think it's important to get some context to understand the approach we've taken, why we've done the capital framework review, what does it entail, and what are some of the goals that we started out with. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to summarize these really quickly. There are three elements that formed our approach towards the capital modernization project. One is to ensure system segment resilience and sustainability in these changing times. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. We also wanted to ensure that the project and the process that we're following allows for adequate time for discussion, consultation on the approach, what may work, may not work. And again, you'll get a lot more details on that particular goal and that particular approach as the webinar progresses. And lastly, which I think is also clearly very important, is the idea of a transparent process for considering the changes that we put forward in the capital framework. So those were the three key goals that we started with. So let me explain a little bit why we needed to change our framework. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, and again, I'm not going to read it, but I don't think this is going to be a little bit of a surprise to any of you. Our capital framework is old. Compared to our other colleagues across the country and the various provinces, jurisdictions, who have revised their capital framework over the last decade or so. Ours is 33 plus years old. It needed to be updated and revamped. And again, nobody on the call here would, I think, disagree with me when I say that given what's happened in the last couple of years, the paradigm and the environment in which we all operate has changed. Globalizations, you can see the list here, consolidation, competitive pressures, operational risk elements, which are really important, where it talks about digitalization, cyber risk, AML, rising interest rates, and what's happened in the last 18 to 24 months. All of these are really volatile elements that have an impact on the capital and the ability to absorb unexpected losses, which is the primary purpose of capital. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons why we wanted to undergo this capital framework, other than the fact that it was old and dated, was that all of us, including the regulator at BCFSA and yourselves as credit unions, are facing a very shifting set of risks. And we have to be able to ensure that we are agile. And you've heard us talk in supervision about resilience, sustainability, and relevance. The capital framework will help us ensure that that is maintained. The other element that's really important from a regulator's point of view is our mandate to ensure safety and sound across the sector. And a revised capital framework, together with some of the other issues that we have, will really help us ensure that the sustainability, not only for your members, but for all of the individuals and population of British Columbia, is ensured. So what does capital modernization look like? Next slide, please. We want to align, and we're not going to be very apologetic on this. We're aligning with international standards. Basically, we begged, borrowed, we stole in some cases, plagiarized. We took all the key principles that we have seen effectively applied internationally and here in Canada at the federal and provincial level, and looked at all of those and said, what made the most sense for British Columbia? We recognize, and I'm going to stress this again, we recognize the unique differences, not only on a proportionate basis between the size of credit unions, but the fact that the BC market environment is much different than other jurisdictions. Having said that, we are still in the situation where we can use what has worked elsewhere, some of the core fundamental principles that should be applied, the table stakes, if you were. I think it's really important with the modern framework to be able to enhance the ability of all of the credit unions to absorb unexpected losses. And the element that you all have undertaken in the last couple of years and continue to undertake is the evolution of your risk management practices. That is critically important to stay ahead of the changing environment, and also to ensure that you're providing that service for your members. And the ultimate outcome for all of the capital modernization project will be a new rule which will be introduced, and you'll see the timeline when Rebecca outlines it in the coming years, to actually replace the capital regulations, or the CRR. Next slide, please. Yeah, again, I'm not going to draw on all of these points because I've actually spoken to some of them. We're drawing on the best elements from Basel, from OSFI, from FSRA, other jurisdictions that make sense. But I do want to stress again and repeat that we are very cognizant, and we have focused exclusively on recognizing the differences between the nature, the structure, the size, the scope, the complexity, not only between banks and credit unions, but between credit unions. I think as you review the paper over the coming consultation period, and you'll see what we have done by recognizing that if you have a less risky portfolio, the amount of capital you'll have to hold could be reduced relative to a more risky portfolio where there may be more capital applied. I don't think anybody would argue that that makes the most sense. And that's really what this the capital modernization program is all about. We're working towards a much more risk-sensitive, made in BC, tailored credit union capital framework. And that takes us to the last slide, which I've just reiterated, is the made in BC approach. And I think you'll find that it makes a lot of sense. It's been well thought out, it's been researched, and we're really, really very much welcoming your questions and your comments once you have an opportunity to read the discussion paper. This particular session is going to be very high level in general, but you will hear from both Derek and Rebecca that we will provide much more focused and bespoke information sessions where we can actually drill into some of the specific elements of the proposed framework. This is going to be a high level introduction at this point. On that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to Derek to give you a sense of what the project overview is and some of the elements in there for consideration. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please, on to discussing the project overview. So the Capital Modernization Project it's a 4-phase project. Over 2021 and 2022, BCFSA completed a lot of planning work to get to where we are today. A lot of research was involved. We made some information requests and data calls to all BC credit unions. We wrote an initial white paper on the Capital Modernization Project. And after completing all of that, we're currently in phase 2 of the project at the current time. The focus right now is on stakeholder engagement. This is a very important phase of the project. During this phase, from late last year until spring, we've been working through the key methodologies and related assumptions with a working group of 14 BC credit unions. Following this working group consultation, there were a number of adjustments and changes to our initial conception of the capital modernization framework. The result is that we now have a refined capital modernization framework that we published on July 25th, so a couple of weeks ago. Once the stakeholder engagement phase is complete, we will then move on to the third phase, which is developing the capital rule itself. And then finally, the last phase of the project will be the implementation and transition phase. Throughout each of the phases 2, 3, and 4, there's going to be lots of opportunities to engage with BCFSA with the upcoming information sessions. And we'll also speak today about how you could submit questions and reach out to us to provide that feedback. Next slide, please. And one more. So over on this slide, we want to provide you with a roadmap of the key streams of the capital modernization consultation approach. We've planned a number of touch points with external stakeholders and credit unions as we work through this project. A lot of the pre-planning work has already been done with the working group of 14 credit unions. And I would like to stress that when we formed that working group of 14 credit unions, it included small credit unions, large ones, medium ones, different complexities, but more importantly, included credit unions spread out geographically throughout the province so that there's a good representation. During the working group sessions, we went to the working group with an initial set of proposals, got feedback, had a lot of back and forth dialogue, and was able to take that back, make adjustments, improve, and provide clarifications where needed. And after incorporating all of that feedback, we were then able to come up with a consultation paper, as you know it today, that was published on July 25th. So we are now in the public consultation process, and we ask that credit unions and all other external stakeholders provide their feedback back to us by the 3rd week of October this year. Between now and that 3rd week of October, we're going to be holding a number of information sessions, including the kickoff one here today, through this 90-day period. Following the consultation, we're going to hold another formal consultation in spring of 2024. That will be our second formal consultation of this capital modernization project. The second phase, the second consultation, is going to focus more on templates and guidelines that go alongside with the new capital regime. The goal is to ensure that the new capital regime is effectively and efficiently implemented. For example, we will consult with credit unions on an updated internal capital adequacy assessment guideline, amongst other guidelines and templates that need a refreshment or need a redraft. Throughout both consultations, we will be providing a number of information sessions, and the next one is scheduled for September. It is worth noting that all information sessions will be recorded and be made readily available for your viewing. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we want to present a bit on the overview of this consultation timeline. As mentioned earlier, we're now in the 90-day consultation period as the capital modernization paper was issued on July 25th. In the coming weeks, we'll have a number of follow-up information sessions touching on the topics of capital overview, capital buffers, operational risk, leverage ratio, market risk, credit risk, amongst other areas. And once that consultation is complete, we will then be moving to the rule development phase of this project. Next slide, please. So this is my favorite slide out of all the slides I'm discussing here today. And so with consultation, the benefit lies in the two-way dialogue that we have with you and that you have with us. Once you have had a chance to fully digest and review the capital modernization paper, combined with attending today's session and the upcoming information sessions, we look forward to seeking your input on the process. We have done a lot of research, a lot of benchmarking, but we don't have all the answers. We want to hear your input and your suggestions. Our end goal is to develop a capital regime here in BC that, while it is based on Basel III, it has the tailoring to reflect the risks and unique circumstances to our BC credit unions. We will review, consider your feedback, and make any refinements to the capital modernization framework and assumptions as appropriate to arrive at that final destination. So we ask that you submit your feedback through the online consultation form until that October period. And should you want to set up any one-on-one discussions with our capital modernization team, we'd be happy to do that. And we also encourage you to reach out to us via email. There's a landing page on our website that Rebecca will be talking more about later on. So next, I'll pass it on to Rebecca, that today will be speaking about an overview of the consultation paper itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Okay, moving on to talk a little bit more about the consultation paper itself. As Derek mentioned earlier, the consultation paper was published last week on July 25th. If you are looking for a copy of it, you can go to the Capital Modernization Project landing page on our website, going to www.bcfsa.ca, scroll down to the update section, and it's easy to find. It's right there, talking about the capital modernization consultation process. Click on that, and there's a landing page with an overview, quite a bit of information, and a number of links that we encourage you to go take a look at that. From there, one of those links is the link to download the consultation paper itself. So with the as we published that paper last week, that kicked off our consultation process, our 90-day consultation. And we wanted to go over a little bit about what you can expect to see in that paper itself, as well as talk about some of the information sessions and how to provide feedback. So some of the key elements in the consultation paper itself and the framework, we're proposing a number of revisions and improvements to our capital modernization framework for credit unions here in BC. So those will address current definitions. We'll be updating a number of definitions within that framework. We will be looking at the minimum capital requirements. In particular, we are introducing a capital conservation buffer. And so that will impact the minimal capital requirements. You can see that in the paper itself. We'll be adopting consolidated reporting. So this is new for BC credit unions. This is something that has been introduced for quite a while across the country in other jurisdictions, both federally and provincially. So we're a little bit behind in adopting that. So that's one of the changes you'll see. You'll also see the inclusion of some new elements in our framework, and those include things like operational risk and leverage ratio requirements. So underlying some of these pieces, some of the key elements under there is we've looked at the definition of Tier 1 and Tier 2 capital, and we're making some adjustments and improvements to that. So we'll be refining that. So you can take a look at that. That will be in section 1 of the paper itself, as well as outlined in more detail in one of our appendices. We're looking at credit risk weights. As Chris mentioned earlier, this is a made in BC approach, and we have done a lot of work looking at what are the risks that face credit unions here in BC and what are the appropriate credit risk weights. So you'll be able to see that in section 2 of the paper. As I mentioned earlier, we're introducing some new components such as required capital conservation buffer, and some of the introduction of some of the lending categories, capital adjustments, operational risk, etc. So all of these things, I won't go through all of them, you'll be able to find in the paper itself. So if we can move on to the next slide. So this sort of outlines some of the sections of the paper and what you can expect to see. I don't know if everyone's had a chance to download the paper and start looking at it yet, but as I mentioned earlier, Section 1 is going to be really focused on capital itself, looking at Tier 1 versus Tier 2 capital. We have a very lengthy section looking at the risk coverage and the different types of risk that are addressed in the capital framework. We talk about the introduction of capital buffers, leverage ratios, etc. So we have sections introducing these new concepts for our capital framework here in BC. We also, I would like to draw attention to Section 5 and Section 6. And in Section 5, this is an important one as well. We are proposing transitional arrangements. This particular framework will be implemented as of January 2026, and we are proposing a stepped approach to implementing this. So that Section 5 will outline what those steps look like, and we are asking for feedback from the credit unions, from external stakeholders on those proposed transitional arrangements. We've also included in Section 6 a number of specific consultation questions. We are asking for feedback on the framework as a whole and on the paper in general, but also on some specific questions that we've outlined in Section 6 as well. So if everyone can note that as well, that would be great. And then we have included a number of appendices in the paper itself, and those include Appendix A is a really line by line overview of the capital framework. It really complements the Section 2, 3, 4 of the paper above. So I recommend pulling that Appendix A out as you read through those sections, and it's referenced in that appendix what the appropriate section is to take a look at. So that's a really useful tool as you work through the consultation paper. And then the remainder appendices B, C, and D really get into some of the details on some of the specific topics, such as Tier 1 versus Tier 2 capital and residential and commercial lending. So there'll be some details broken out and put into the appendices there. If we can move on to the next slide. So as we've been working through the project so far, we've been working with working groups. We've had a number of conversations with credit unions already, and we've gotten a lot of questions and topics of interest to the BC credit unions that we've been getting questions about and hearing about already. And so we've addressed a lot of all of these actually, in the paper itself. And we will be also setting up information sessions starting in September to go through a lot of these as well. So as you go through the paper, you're going to see proposal on share classification, contributed surplus, how does that fit in Tier 1 versus Tier 2 capital, AOCI, all of those things. You'll also see, as we take a BC specific tailored approach to this framework, you'll see that we are looking at amortization 25 versus 30 years. What and how does that play into the market here in BC? We're going to provide clarification on securitizations, operational risk, etc. So you'll see all of these topics of interest addressed in the paper itself. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, what's next? I encourage you all to please go check the website, check that project landing page, and download the paper itself. And we also have information there, as well as here on our information sessions that we've scheduled for September. So right now we have the 3 information sessions. We are going to be addressing capital specifically in session 2, that's scheduled for September 7th. Session 3 is going to be talking about buffers, operational risk, and a number of other topics. And then session 4 will be credit risk overview. Session 1 is today's session. In case anyone is asking that question looking at this slide. And so I encourage you all, sign up for these sessions. Like I said, some of these invites have gone and information has gone out by email, but if you haven't gotten those emails, please log in, check the the website, and it'll all be there, all of that information. If you have additional questions, you're not finding it, please send us an email. We do have an email address specifically for this project that you can reach out to us, and that is cucapital@bcfsa.ca, and that will be on the next slide at the end of the presentation here. Oh, if we can go back to the, previous slide. Thank you. We're also asking that you would please submit your questions in advance of these sessions. And so with the invitation and on the website, the BCFSA website, there is a form that you can click and easily submit questions that way, or you can send it by email as well. So we are asking, once again, please submit your questions. By submitting those questions in advance of the sessions, we can really tailor the conversation and the slide deck and all of that to really make the most of the time. Another note is that we will be recording these sessions and they will be available after the sessions themselves. So if you can't make September 7th, for example, but you're curious about the capital overview, please feel free to check out our website and that will be published there. So to clarify, we will be getting feedback, questions, communicating with you in a number of ways as we work through the consultation process itself and as we work through the sessions. So there's a few ways to communicate with us. So there will be these Ask Us forms specifically for these 3 sessions. We're asking you to submit questions on that. You can find the link on the website. We also have a consultation feedback form, and this can be used to respond to those consultation questions that we've outlined in the consultation paper, as well as provide general feedback on the paper itself. We also at the end have that email address, and if none of these other methods work to communicate with us, please send us an email. Please reach out with any questions or to set up one-on-one sessions as well using that email address. So if we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So we're going to open it up at this point for questions. As I mentioned earlier, here's the email address that you can submit questions, reach out to set up one-on-one sessions, all of those things as we work through the consultation. And I encourage everyone on the line to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if you move your cursor down to the bottom and hover down there, there's a Q&A function down there, and we'll use that to ask questions. So I'm going to give it a second for folks to type in their questions there. And as we do that, I was hoping maybe we could get Chris to talk a little bit about the why capital modernization is needed at this time. Chris, can I pass that over to you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, as I said in my comments, as to why, the world has changed, and a capital framework, a liquidity framework, a credit risk scoring system, the way any of us approach our business activities with our members, how we respond to the competitive environment, all requires reaction. And all of those have contributed over the last number of years to identify that there is room for improvement within the capital framework itself. One of the points that I think is really critical that we all remember is capital is used not just for funding operations, but it's actually used as the loss absorption capacity for unexpected events and unexpected losses. And the world has changed so quickly, and some of the risks that we are all facing have magnified to such an extent. The capital framework has to be able to capture those risks. We have to have that resilience and that sustainability in face. So that's why the capital modernization is so very important.
Thank you, Chris. So as we go through the questions, I want to reiterate again, we will be holding these information sessions in September. There's going to be lots of opportunities to ask those questions at that point as well. So I encourage you all to take a look at our website, sign up to attend. So next question. How would the framework evolve with changes in the marketplace as new and unforeseen risks evolve? Derek, I'm going to pass that one over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Trouble with the mute button there. So we're going to continue, as we do continuous monitoring our approach. BCFSA will continue to monitor the landscape for new and evolving risk. But, Basel measures continue to evolve, and BCFSA will monitor these measures for applicability and appropriateness within the BC credit union systems. The current proposed framework, it's designed to be flexible. So should the risk environment change, we're going to revisit components of the assumptions through time, whether it's looking at different, risk weight calibration adjustments, or maybe even additional bolt-ons that we need to apply to the framework. The framework we're putting in, we propose here is modern, effective, and efficient in terms of that we know the world isn't static. I've talked to many of you at the World Credit Union Conference a couple of weeks ago, and it was noted numerous times that there's been more change over the last 12 to 24 months than there have been change over the last 10 years. And we got to take that into account into our capital development, into our rules, into our guidelines. So that's what we proposed here. It's not a once and done conversation. We're going to build something that we believe is built to last for the next little while, but we all know the world in 5-10 years, the landscape of the credit union system is going to be different. We're going to look at bolt-ons, assumption changes to ensure that this methodology remains modern, effective, and efficient in the way we look at capital. As Chris mentioned, capital is to absorb losses in those unexpected tail events, and we need to ensure that there's reputational strong of capital within this framework to withstand changes going not only now but also the future. So.
Thank you, Derek. Okay, another question. It seems that the new capital framework will be very different from the current framework. Has BCFSA considered potential unintended consequences? Could this framework put the credit unions at a disadvantage in competing with the banks? Derek, can you take that one as well?
Sure. Yep. No, for sure. That's great question. It is a different paradigm and a bit of a new regime. At the end of the day, when we started out down this path, we looked at, okay, what's our mandate? It's to safeguard the confidence and stability of the BC financial services sector, safety and soundness of the credit union system here. And taking that strategic direction in that North Star, if you will. So the objective of our framework then is to ensure that capital adequacy requirements reflect the underlying risk of the BC credit union segment. In other words, it's to ensure that there's an accurate calibration between risk assumed by an institution and the loss absorbing capital that is expected for that institution to hold. Many other jurisdictions have already moved to this approach or are already heading in that direction. BC is one of the last jurisdictions actually in Canada to apply a Basel III framework. And again, we just want to reiterate, we're not just taking Basel III and copying and pasting. We're looking at Basel III. What are the best components of that? What are some of the lessons learned that other provincial jurisdictions have, roadblocks that they've had? And we're incorporating all that into a made in BC approach here. At the end of the day, it's to ensure that there's a high degree of confidence to the capital of an institution and to the BC system, and that capital regime is both effective and modern, which is what the BC July 25th consultation paper is that we've submitted.
Thank you, Derek. So another question is asking about ICAP, and it's asking if with the introduction of this new framework, will ICAP be updated? Andrew, can I get you to take that one, please?
Yeah, sure. So I think Derek alluded to it earlier. There are certain guidelines that sit tangential to this capital modernization project, and ICAP is one of those. So we do have an existing guideline on that, but obviously with the changes that we're making to our capital framework in general, I think it will be incumbent on us to make changes to that ICAP guideline, make some tweaks to reflect the stage and the ways that we've changed the framework in general. So we'll be certainly taking a look at that. And I think as part of that review, we'll also be taking a look at the applicability of ICAP. And like right now, there's a subset of credit unions that need to undertake the ICAP, but we'll be kicking the tires on that and see if it needs to be more broadly applicable to the system as a whole. But again, throughout throughout that piece, looking at ICAP and as well as any other pieces, we'll be taking a consultation approach to this. That is going to be the core of all our changes that we make, and a common thread running through this and other pieces that we change. So more to come on that, but yeah, it will definitely need to be updated.
Thank you, Andrew. Derek, I'm going to get you to take the next one, and this is asking about QDIC assessment. Are you able to talk about what the impact on QDIC will be?
Yep, no, for sure. So our QDIC team is fully up to date and aware of the proposals made in the Capital Modernization consulting paper. It is QDIC's plan on doing a review of their metrics that they're using within the differential premium system methodology, and ensure that once we finalize capital modernization, are in place to know with full clarity methodology assumptions. They're going to ensure that there's alignment between the differential premium system and that final methodology there, and assumptions and methodology within the capital modernization framework. So just to reiterate, in conclusion, QDIC does plan on ensuring that there's calibration between the final capital modernization framework assumptions within that, and then also the QDIC's differential premium system assumptions. We'll be speaking with each other, sharing findings across the board to ensure that we're both coordinated and there's no major differences in looking at it. At the end of the day, it's capital. We want to ensure that that alignment is there. So.
Thank you, Derek. Okay, we're going to leave it open for another minute here to see if there's any more questions that come in. But if not, I think we can wrap this session up early. So as we wait for additional questions, can we just bump back one more slide, go to the previous slide? Thank you, Christina. I just want to reiterate and have this information up here again. We will be getting into the individual topics in more detail in these sessions, so I encourage you all to attend. Okay, so with no more questions, we're going to wrap it up for today. Thank you everyone for attending. We appreciate your time and we look forward to digging into this in more detail starting in September. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.